Negotiations are closer than ever. This is being reported in a race by reputable Western media, focusing on the mood and statements of the new White House administration.
President Trump has been in office for less than 30 days. And during this time, we have achieved more than the previous administration. In 3 years.
The sharp statements by American representatives at the Munich conference have stirred the Europeans.
In a certain sense, this conference is a nightmare for Europe. On the other hand, it clarified a lot. The speech by the American Vice President helped us understand that Trump's America lives in a different universe.
Washington's plans to leave Europe out of the negotiations with Putin have mobilized the old world. Several European leaders have declared their readiness to send their troops to Ukraine. In Paris, London, and Brussels, they assure that their armed forces, as part of peacekeeping troops, will be able to help establish a ceasefire. To begin with, it should be noted that peacekeeping operations serve as a neutral third party to establish and maintain a ceasefire and create a buffer zone between the warring parties.
Peacekeeping operations are carried out at the moment of supporting peace, that is, separating the opposing sides. But there must be agreement from both sides for this. Plus, it is a mandate from the UN Council, which provides for the introduction of a peacekeeping operation with peace support.
In addition to the agreement of the two warring sides, a political decision is needed for third countries to send their soldiers. In this matter, the leadership, as always, is shown by the Baltic countries, Sweden, Denmark, and Britain.
The United Kingdom is ready to work on security guarantees for Ukraine. This also means a willingness and desire to contribute to ensuring Ukraine's security guarantees by deploying our own troops on the ground if necessary. I'm not saying this lightly. I feel very deeply the responsibility associated with the potential threat to British military personnel.
According to Western media, European military forces will not be on the front lines, but if Russian troops attempt to resume the war, peacekeepers will show strength. Additionally, the contingent deployed in Ukraine will be supported by a large number of military forces outside of Ukraine, in case they need to quickly build up strength and advance.
If peace enforcement operations, where peacekeepers act as a military force, are capable of enforcing peace, this is also a UN Security Council mandate to conduct a military operation to compel the cessation of hostilities.
But here the issue of peacekeepers hinges on the aforementioned UN Security Council mandate, of which Russia is a permanent member. And it is logical that Moscow opposes the idea of deploying European troops on Ukrainian territory.
Currently, there are proposals to involve military contingents in the peacekeeping forces, affiliated with Russia, Brazil, and China. The position of the Russian Federation is the absence of military contingents from NATO countries. Russia insists on the presence of military contingents either from so-called neutral countries or even from countries affiliated with the Kremlin, like Belarus.
According to experts, such restrictions by Moscow can be circumvented by concluding bilateral agreements on military technical assistance between Ukraine and European countries. To date, the most specific figures have been provided by France, which stated that it could allocate about 10,000 troops. President Emmanuel Macron believes that without reliable security guarantee mechanisms for Ukraine, one of which is peacekeepers, any ceasefire agreement could prove to be as ineffective as the Minsk agreements, which at the time failed to prevent conflict. A full-scale war.
We will work on this together with all Europeans, Americans, and Ukrainians. This is a key moment. We are convinced that Europeans should invest better, more, and together in their security and defense, both today and in the future.
According to journalists from the Washington Post, citing sources in European governments, in total, European countries are ready to send about 30,000 troops to Ukraine.
The length of the combat lines is about 1,200 kilometers. The assumptions made by our partners, namely the presence of about 30 to 40,000 peacekeepers in Ukraine, do not solve the issue of war. The president of Ukraine insists that the number of peacekeeping forces should be at least 100,000.
And yet, the main problem with deploying a peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine lies in the scale and intensity of the hostilities. The experience of past deployments of peacekeepers in various wars around the world shows that such contingents do not always guarantee the end of a war.
Freezing the war is a conditional Cypriot scenario, where the military conflict is in a frozen state, with neither side recognizing the territorial claims of the other, meaning the war could resume at any moment with different intensity.
The presence of peacekeepers also did not prevent Azerbaijan from taking Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenia. In the case of Karabakh, the guarantors of peace between Yerevan and Baku were Russian military forces. The agreement concluded following the Second Karabakh War between Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan implied that the so-called peacekeepers would be stationed along the line of demarcation for 5 years, with an automatic extension for another 5. But just 3 years later, the Azerbaijani army, without encountering any resistance from the peacekeepers, took full control. Nagorno-Karabakh. And yet, the most egregious case of passivity and indifference by the peacekeepers was the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda when in 1994, under the watchful eye of the UN peacekeeping mission. In just a few months, the Rwandan ethnic Hutu killed about 1 million Tutsi. One episode of the genocide, known in history as the Don Bosco Massacre, is particularly telling. When about 2,000 Tutsi, including hundreds of children, were fleeing from the horrific massacre, they took refuge in a local school where 100 peacekeepers from Belgium and France were stationed. When the school was surrounded by armed Hutu, the peacekeepers simply evacuated in vehicles, abandoning thousands of Tutsi to the mercy of the Hutu, who immediately, as soon as the last peacekeeper vehicle left the school grounds, began a brutal slaughter. In the end, out of 2,000 people, only a few survived. Those who managed to hide among the numerous corpses. In the case of Rwanda, one of the factors contributing to the peacekeepers' inability to act in the face of aggression was the lack of sufficient equipment and weaponry. European military forces sent to Ukraine without the proper amount of heavy equipment, including aviation, will not be able to prevent the aggressor from making another attempt to resume the war. Strong, independent, and armed to the teeth, as they say, Europe. The only available way for Europeans to influence Moscow and Washington on security issues.
When parents are having dinner, the children have to sit at a different table. In the USA, they are negotiating with Russia, and not a single European is at the table. It has become absolutely clear that Europeans are like children. If you don't invest in defense, if you are not strong, they treat you like children.
That's all for now. Don't forget to write in the comments about which types of weapons you would like to learn more about. Like this video and, of course, subscribe to our new Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.